In 1919, as the world recovered from the Great War, a debate was raging across the world as to the role of the Navy in any future conflict. Despite being confined to the continents of Europe and the Middle East for the majority of the fighting, the advances in naval technology during World War I were as considerable as they were deadly. For the first time, the mass use of submarines caused chaos among international trade lanes. Modern dreadnought-class battleships fought a pitched battle on the high seas off the shores of Jutland. But most importantly of all, naval aviation was born. Over the skies of the Western Front, it was the aircraft, more than anything, that changed the fundamental nature of war on the surface. No longer could an army maneuver in its rear areas without fear of observation or attack. No longer could a security perimeter prevent the infiltration of spies or the covert relay of information. Now an enemy could find you, analyze you, and kill you practically anywhere on or around the battlefield. And in the vast tracts of the open ocean, where there are no landmarks to navigate by or locals to interrogate, the ability to scout over 200 miles away and then radio back the enemy's position, should you find them, was a capability that would prove invaluable. And despite naval guns of the period having a range of only 20 miles, if you had a force equipped with aircraft that could carry bombs, that time-old saying would once again apply. If you can see it, you can kill it. And the United States Navy hated everything about it. Convinced that the battleship could never be supplanted in the field of naval warfare, they categorically refused to support the introduction of aviation into the Navy, in anything other than a supporting role. If there was any flying to be done, it would be done by aircraft launched from small aviation cruisers or seaplane tenders. They would carry 20 planes at most, and maybe a balloon or two if they asked nicely. Yet what the Navy hadn't considered was the opinion of the public, the opinion of Congress, but most importantly, the opinion of America's airmen. Introducing the leader of the US Army Air Corps, pioneer aviator, combat pilot, and air warfare visionary, Billy Mitchell. And when I call him a visionary, I genuinely mean it. He was the man who planned the aerial component of the very first coordinated air-land combined arms offensive, the Battle of Saint-Mihiel. He rode in the observer seat of British and French aircraft on combat missions before the Americans had entered the conflict, in order to write the book on aerial warfare for the US Army. And perhaps most impressively, he planned and developed the very first combat use of paratroopers in the history of warfare, an operation that never took place due to the armistice of 1918. This man was a powerhouse, and this powerhouse wasn't happy. He saw the Navy taking up valuable resources, spending billions on floating hunks of steel that would be rendered entirely obsolete by air power. Furthermore, he ran into serious resistance from the Naval Aviation branch, who, despite ostensibly being on his side, were paranoid that his calls for an independent air force would absorb them and force a merger with the Army. And integrating with the Army, as we all know, is a fate worse than death to the sailors. So Mitchell went on the offensive in his typical style, thinking ahead of his time and outside the box. He attacked the Navy not in Congress, not in the Department of War, but in the press. In the man's own words, changes in military systems come about only through the pressure of public opinion or disaster in war. And seeing as the attack on Pearl Harbor, something he actually predicted in a report he wrote about a potential war with Japan, is a war that won't happen for another 20 years, he was determined to do it via the former. So he blasted lawmakers and admirals in the media while lobbying Congress to allow him to prove his point. I mean, shit, they had a bunch of old German warships seized at the end of World War I. Park them offshore where you can observe them, and watch me sink them. The Navy naturally did everything they could to prevent this, including going so far as to run their own tests with aircraft, which they subsequently rigged, to prove that battleships were impervious to aerial attack. The fact that they used non-armor-piercing bombs that were way too small, and in some tests they even used dummy bombs instead of live ordnance, didn't get presented to Congress or the media. That is until whistleblowers leaked it. Look, James Burton may be full of shit, but Pentagon Wars and Sergeant Bilko are incredibly effective satirical films for a reason. And after all of this corruption came to light, Congress immediately pushed through legislation overruling the Navy, authorizing Mitchell to carry out his testing program under a series of joint Army-Navy exercises, codenamed Project B, the results of which were conclusive. After the Navy ran its tests with as many restrictions as possible to fudge the results, when the Army Air Corps attacked the German destroyer G-102, it sank after 19 minutes. And this was just the warm-up. Next week, they sank the German cruiser Frankfurt with 600-pound bombs, despite the Navy forbidding the Army from using their heaviest weapons or aerial torpedoes. That's right, to test the efficacy of aircraft against ships, they banned the aircraft from using anti-ship weapons and then held them up in between strikes to check the damage. Literally, in the middle of the test, they'd stop everything, go on board and, air quotes, check the damage. Rumors of them doing damage control in the process still persist to this day. But even if they did that, it didn't help them. The ship sank. And then, finally, on July 21st, it was time for the men of the Air Corps to take down a battleship. And then, the Navy not only doubled, they tripled down. They made up every rule they could think of. You can only attack in a certain way. You can't bring more than 3 of your biggest bombs, and you're only allowed to have 2 direct hits. Oh, and you're still not allowed to use torpedoes. However, after hearing this, Billy Mitchell responded, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Fuck you, I do what I want. By the way, catch." He took off with a formation of aircraft fully loaded with 2,000-pound bombs, and then proceeded to demolish the German battleship Ostfriesland with a barrage of heavy ordnance, sinking the ship within 20 minutes. In the aftermath of this humiliation, the Navy immediately cried foul, saying the Army cheated, and that even if they hadn't, real warships would be moving and so you'd miss anyway. In the resulting bureaucratic political shitshow that happened afterwards, the establishment would eventually gang up on Mitchell, court-martialing him and forcing him into retirement. But not before he proved his point again in another series of tests and, with the aid of one Franklin Delano Roosevelt, pressured the Navy into adopting aircraft carriers in a major support role. Though admittedly he had help from the Washington Naval Treaty in that regard, which limited battleship tonnage, but not carriers. Even so, the US Navy and other navies around the world would continue to build battleships. Larger, faster, and more powerful. For 20 years it continued with the Navy showing unshakable confidence in its fleet. So much so that at the Army-Navy football game on November 29, 1941, the midshipmen from Annapolis flew a banner mocking the Army Air Forces with an image of their pride and joy, the USS Arizona. And on that banner bore a caption loudly proclaiming that battleships were unsinkable by bombs. 8 days later, Arizona would lie at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, its magazine detonated by an armor-piercing bomb dropped from an aircraft. The Japanese, like the Americans, had its own battleship mafia known as the Fleet Faction, led by one Admiral Nagumo. Yet they also had a visionary of their own, Admiral Yamamoto, who, with the aid of his acolytes Tamon Yamaguchi and Minoru Genda, and essentially created the idea of what would become the modern carrier battle group. If World War I proved to be the birth of naval aviation, World War II was the proof of its supremacy over the battleship. Just think of every major battleship sunk during World War II. The Bismarck, though it was sunk in a surface engagement, was ultimately doomed to her destruction by the humble Fairey Swordfish, a biplane launched from a carrier. And that biplane would also carry out the attack on Taranto, sinking the Italian battleship fleet at anchor, an attack which the Japanese used to plan their own strike on Pearl Harbor. Then, in the wake of the aforementioned Day of Infamy, it was the US carriers, not the battleships, that turned the tide of the Pacific War. The mighty German battleship Tirpitz was blasted to pieces by strategic bombers. The pride of Mussolini's Regia Marina, the Italian battleship Roma, was sunk by German anti-ship guided bombs, the first ever sinking of its kind. And of course, the 2 mightiest warships ever built, Yamato and Musashi, were cast into the abyss by American naval aviators, having spent the entire war doing basically nothing and never meeting another battleship in surface-to-surface combat. And to this day, with the exception of the Iowa modernization in the 1980s to counter the Kirov, it has been the aircraft carrier and the missile cruiser that has formed the backbone of naval warfare. Because history, technology, and experience has shown that the battleship is obsolete. So naturally, Trump wants to build them again. Normally, my video schedule is disrupted by Ukraine pulling off a coup in military history. And in fairness, this video is technically also about that, given they sunk a submarine with an underwater drone. And that does play into this discussion somewhat for obvious reasons. Also, it's really funny. They also nailed a bunch of Russian aircraft over the past couple days, so that's really awesome too. But given that the implications of this so-called battleship are so massive, I felt the need to talk about it. and as far as I can tell from what I see, it's nothing but a Potemkin village of a naval program. Which, ironically enough, would make it the first battleship Potemkin in a long time, and with any luck, it will be just as politically relevant for the same reason. Yet getting back to the point, the reason why I opened with a history lesson, besides the fact that it's kind of my brand, is that we have known for over a century, literally over a century, that battleships are an obsolete concept. A thesis proved by the spiritual founder of the American Air Services. Yet now, in the year of our Lord, 2025, we have the President of the United States calling for the construction of new battleships. Battleships which will, of course, be named after himself. Something in violation of just about every tradition upheld by the US Navy, which in the modern era has made a point of not naming their warships after serving presidents. Hence why they've called this the USS Defiant for some reason. Man, Cisco would be pissed off about that. But alas, we live in a time where Trump can put his name in front of John F. Kennedy's name on the Kennedy Center, so what the hell, I guess. This administration, no matter how you look at it, has been an absolute disaster for US naval procurement. And while much of it can be traced back all the way to the Bush era in terms of shipbuilding capacity and long-term planning, to say that the Trump regime is pouring gasoline on an already raging dumpster fire would be an understatement bigger than the displacement of the ship that will supposedly bear his name. The ongoing crisis in vessel procurement in the US Navy has been a long-running theme over the past 20 years. The futuristic Zumwalt class, heralded as the destroyer for the modern age, was priced at $5 billion per unit, and doesn't even have a main gun system due to the ammunition being so expensive, and the barrels getting destroyed after minimal use. So much so that the Navy of all people, deemed it too costly to implement, cancelling the entire gun system after the ship was already built, reducing it to a stealth Arleigh Burke that costs double the normal price to operate. Next, of course, you have the infamous Littoral Combat Ship, intended to be a modular design that could have mission packages swapped out while in port to fulfill literally every single support role imaginable. ASW, amphibious landing support with roll-on, roll-off capability, surface warfare, electronic warfare, aviation frigate, you name it, this thing was going to do everything. Except it didn't have a VLS system for missiles, which made it completely unsuitable for half of those roles, instead relying on box-mounted missile systems that ruin its low observability profile. Its littoral design meant it couldn't effectively operate alongside the Blue Water Navy, the hulls began to crack in half after only a few years of use, and the limitations in capability caused by its small size reduced its efficiency in the few missions it could do. Overall, the LCS program was a complete disaster, resulting in its subsequent termination and plans by the US Navy to retire the first 4 ships in class, despite the fact that they are facing severe problems in both the modernity of their active vessels and their overall raw ship numbers. So to rectify this, the US Navy did what it's always done in the past 20 years, and just built more Arleigh Burkes, because it's an excellent design with fantastic modularity, Aegis capability, ASW capability, and they know how to build it. The problem is, of course, the same problem the LCS and the Zumwalt were brought in to solve still persists. The Flight 3 Arleigh Burkes are somewhere in between a frigate and a cruiser, able to perform both roles. They escort the carrier groups, launch Tomahawks, chase away submarines, all that good stuff. But they are too big for inshore fire support, and they don't have large caliber weapons or railguns to fulfill that mission from range. Furthermore, while excellent at surface warfare and escorting capital ships, for the various other small, some would say menial tasks a Navy ship has to do, at $2.5 billion US per unit, she is very expensive for what she is. Especially when you consider that some of the Flight 1 hulls date back to the 1980s alongside the Ticonderogas and are suffering the same problems, requiring extensive refits or total replacement, which again would be prohibitively expensive. Now, you don't need to be an armchair analyst, military journalist, or terminally online nerd to work that out. The US Navy knew all this even as they signed the order to restart the Arleigh Burke production in 2013. Because as the ink was drying on that signature, the concept of the Constellation-class frigate was already on the drawing board. You see, smaller NATO navies, Japan, Australia, and of course, China, all came to the same conclusion at the same time. Reduced visibility vessels with plenty of bang for your buck are the future. In warfare, not being seen is the prerequisite of tactical and operational surprise. Call me Captain Obvious, which makes me captain of a ship that actually exists. And the need to operate in all conditions, in all environments, while carrying out a variety of mission sets is an equally important requirement. Most countries can't afford massive fleets of dedicated vessels with large crews, Aegis systems, and railguns supported by an aircraft carrier. They need to be smart with their money. So, to meet their operational requirements, navies across the globe have been developing and subsequently deploying low observability missile frigates with VLS capability, a 5-inch gun up front, and a helipad on the back. Australia originally ordered the Hunter class from BAE Systems, based on the Royal Navy's Type 26. A solid design with tons of capability, including Aegis, but it was still a bit pricey. Thankfully though, we teamed up with Japan to purchase their Mogami class design to round out our surface fleet. So much so that Australia will, for the first time in my lifetime, have an actual navy worth boasting about. In relation to our size anyway. We even bought a new replenishment ship too. We live in unprecedented times in more ways than one. We still won't retrofit our Canberras to carriers though, and I'm still mad about that. But anyway, we're not talking about the Royal Australian Navy here. Then you have all the other nations around the world, from Italy to Denmark to the Netherlands to Indonesia to God knows who else, all of them adopting a similar program. And of course, once again, you have China. Our friends in the People's Republic are putting hulls in the water of every class at an absolutely ridiculous rate. While nowhere near the tonnage of the US Navy, yet, they are catching up at a rather alarming pace, and clearly intend to challenge US dominance in the Pacific. The Type 55 destroyer, with its 13,000-ton displacement, stealthy profile, and considerable armament, is a serious rival for the Arleigh Burke despite its older internal tech, and it comes in at a bargain of $1 billion per unit, while the number of frigates they are building is simply staggering. Some estimates put the growth of the People's Liberation Army Navy at 200% that of the US Navy, with plans to grow even more. With that threat in mind, the Pentagon approached a joint Franco-Italian shipbuilding consortium to buy their Modular Frigate European Multi-Mission, or FREM design, a frigate capable of being tailored to fit a variety of combat roles depending on the buyer's requirements. It was beautiful, affordable, off the shelf. All they had to do was tweak the design slightly to fit American specifications, maybe chuck on Aegis integration on there for a few extra million. It was a slam dunk. Affordable. Effective. 85% commonality of parts with NATO partners. It was going to be amazing. And then the Pentagon feature creeped the hell out of it, so by the time they actually got around to building the thing, it would take double the projected time to construct, cost triple the price, and have only 15% commonality of parts. So, as a result, they cancelled the program. Why? Why are you like this? It was right there. Hell, even if you cancel it, do what we did and just buy the Mogami. Again, it's fully integrated with all our stuff. You can just buy it off the shelf with a few tweaks. It's right there. But no. The Constellation is only having 2 ships built in its class, with a full cancellation of the rest of the program, echoing the fate of the Zumwalt class. Except in this case, it's even dumber, because at least the Zumwalt had a fallback plan. This time, the US Navy has a brand new, revolutionary idea, an idea so brilliant it's shattered the minds of every analyst, naval professional, and strategist across the globe. They call it the FFX program, which is a Coast Guard cutter given a stealth makeover. No VLS missile system, no fancy capabilities, severely limited operational utility compared to the Constellation, and a proposed modular mission package, done in a similar way to the LCS. So let me get this straight. You had a frigate, ready to go, on the books, in the yards. They were already being built. You just had to be smart about how you built them. They would fill all the current gaps in your force lineup, simultaneously giving you far more hulls in the water and allowing you to use the Flight 3 Arleigh Burkes in a dedicated cruiser role while you develop the DDGX program. And you were replacing all of that with a Coast Guard ship wearing a stealth body kit using a failed operational concept that you scrapped an entire class of ship for. Look. I've spoken to Perun, the PowerPoint man. I've spoken to the rest of the rounder table. I've even spoken to actual experts, real-life naval experts. I know it's hard to believe, but I have. And everyone, literally everyone, is looking at all of this going on and just asking, why? Where did you all go wrong? What are you guys from Annapolis doing? And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, any stupider, here it is. The USS Defiant, lead ship of the Trump class, which in of itself is a ridiculous statement to make. The lead ship of a class is determined by its name. How can it be a Trump class if the lead ship is named the Defiant? But yes, apparently it's the Trump class, a battleship for the modern era. By Poseidon's holy trident, what the actual fuck is this thing? A surface combatant capital ship in 2025. What are we doing here, guys? Are we actually being serious? Incidentally, my suspicion is no, and this is once again a money laundering scheme for the various ne'er-do-wells in the Trump administration, while acting as a propaganda piece for his base. But let's, for the sake of argument and for this video's existence, assume that this is actually real. First of all, we have to consider the biggest problem. That being shipyard capacity. According to the fact sheet released by the Navy, this thing will have a displacement in excess of 35,000 tons. There aren't many yards in the United States capable of producing ships of that size in general, let alone military shipyards capable of doing the subsequent outfitting process. These things are 75 to 80% the size of a Ford-class aircraft carrier, and the Navy is already flat out building those. Do you remember the Ford-class's exploding toilets incident? I remember the exploding toilets incident. But my question remains, where are you actually going to build these things? Starbase 1? I don't know, the moon? And suppose you actually do find the yard space for it, how will you actually do that without jeopardizing the construction of the upcoming Ford classes that are scheduled to replace the Nimitzes, which have been in service since, let me check my notes, the 1970s? Well, the solution to this is obvious. Build more naval yards. Good! Excellent! We've been telling you to do that for a decade now. If you do decide to build more naval yards, this is fantastic news. But that's the thing. That's the key problem. That needed to start a decade ago. Unless you are willing to go all out Kaiser shipyards in World War II, with an unlimited federal budget and the War Powers Act behind you, setting up a military shipyard is a long and expensive process. It'll be 2 years before a new yard is even ready to start considering building anything. And the president apparently wants the first 2 holes in the water by 2028. And obviously it has to be done by 2028, because if it goes into 2029, barring a miracle, or more likely Trump just ignoring the Constitution, the incoming Democrat administration will cancel the entire project. So you want to design, build, and launch a 35,000 to 40,000 ton surface combatant from scratch and have it in the water for outfitting by the middle of 2028. Look, I know Donnie and Pete Kegsbreath talk a lot of shit, but even the most diehard conservative watching this has got to see this as utter nonsense. For reference, it took the Soviet Union, a country spending half its GDP on defense under an authoritarian single-party state, 2 years to design, 3.5 years to build, and another 3 years to outfit the very first Kirov-class missile cruiser. Now granted, computer and fabrication technology has come a long way since then, and the United States industrial base is a lot stronger than that in the Soviet Union in terms of technological capability. But still, given the state of shipbuilding across the board in the United States, I don't see 2.5 years as a feasible timeline, even if they, as the president said, start almost immediately. Hi, post-production Animarchy here. So apparently they've revised it to early 2030, which is a far more reasonable estimate, though again, I have my doubts. And anyway, the likelihood is a Democrat administration is going to come in and cancel it. Fun fact though, apparently the projected cost of one of these things is $15 billion per unit. So, that's interesting. If they were to actually attempt this, it would have to take up yard space at somewhere like Newport News, which despite all his protestations to the contrary, would definitely delay the rollout of the new Ford-class carriers and the commissioning of the USS Enterprise, which in my very biased opinion should count as an act of high treason. Then again, Trump got up in front of the entire Navy and said with his whole chest that the email's electromagnetic catapult system was a disaster and that they should go back to steam, despite the Navy already perfecting the system and benefiting from the myriad of operational advantages an electromagnetic system provides, not least of which being a massive reduction in maintenance costs. So maybe he plans on cancelling the Ford class and refitting the Nimitzes like they did to the Iowas. Who knows? I don't. Apparently, they're proposing to build a new steam variant of the Ford, which for some reason exists. I don't know what's going on. What I do know, though, is the proposed stats of the new battleship, which was published by the Navy. Let's have a look, shall we? Now, for those of you watching at home who have some knowledge of naval procurement, at this point you will realize that I chose the title of this video very intentionally, because the stats you are seeing on screen right now are, to put it mildly, optimistic. And if I were to put it bluntly, pants on head, room temperature IQ, medically and functionally brain dead. You know the word I would like to use, but I have to behave myself. I don't know what substances are going around at the Pentagon, but whatever it is, I want some. I mean, they have been seizing all those Venezuelan ships recently in preparation for a new war the great leader said he wasn't going to start, so maybe they found something interesting. Suffice to say, we accuse the Russians today, and the Soviets historically, of overpromising capability on their new weapon systems in order to flex their prowess and give them something to put in the propaganda newsreels. Well, I present you all the Trump Class Stealth Battleship, which is an insane sentence in of itself, but hey, this is the reality we live in. According to the stat sheet provided by the Navy, it's nearly 900 feet long, 115 feet wide, has a draft of 30 feet, a displacement of 35,000 tons, around 700 to 850 crew, and a class size of 20 to 25? What? How? Where are you going to build them? With what money? I mean, you just print more when you need it, but seriously, even the Pentagon has limits. We proved it with the Zumwalt. In fact, this is just the Zumwalt, but bigger. What the Okay, I'm calm. And you know what? That's all well and good. It's not that insane. A surface combatant 80% the size of a Ford-class carrier that will clog up the shipyards and prevent us from actually building the Ford class. But hey, it will be a surface combatant bigger than the Kirov, so that's a win for Team USA. What kind of bang will you get for your buck? And the answer is a lot. You will get a lot of bang for your buck in 10 years' time, because half of the bang doesn't exist yet. Apparently, after refusing to learn from the disaster that was the Zumwalt Advanced Gun System or the modular LCS Mission Package System, they have decided to put not one, but 3 systems that haven't been built yet on this design. So let's start with the white elephant in the room, that colossal weapon system on the front, which according to the stat sheet is a 32 megajoule class railgun, which, if the designation is correct, means they are planning to field the BAE Systems railgun prototype built under the auspices of the Navy back in 2005. The same project that had its funding cut entirely in 2021, after over 15 years of development hell due to technical challenges that couldn't be overcome. Namely, expensive ammunition that couldn't be guided due to the round going too fast for satellite and GPS guidance, extremely inefficient use of onboard electrical power, and a required barrel change after around a dozen rounds fired. For perspective, an Iowa-class 16-inch main gun could fire over 300 fully charged rounds before accuracy began to degrade, let alone requiring a full barrel replacement. Then again, the Japanese have successfully started testing a 5 megajoule railgun with multiple hundreds of rounds shot through a barrel, so you never know, we could just buy that one. Then you have the supplementary systems, among which being 2 300 kilowatt or even 2 600 kilowatt lasers. Keep in mind the Helios system, currently on active duty with the fleet, is only 150 kilowatts at maximum output. Now, lasers should be a key feature of any future-proofed surface combatant. In the era of drone warfare, we can't continue to rely on the SM-2 and SM-6 missile for long-range interception of incoming targets. Unless it's a hypersonic missile or a nuke, we don't want to be wasting a $1 million interceptor on a $100,000 UCAV. It's just not practical. My question is, you want to mount two 600 kilowatt direct energy weapons that are 10 times larger than the UK's cutting-edge Dragonfire system, on top of 4 Odin 60 kilowatt Dazzler systems, and then, if that wasn't enough, you want to mount 4 30mm cannons, 2 5-inch guns with high-velocity penetrator rounds, 128 VLS cells across the entire vessel, 12 dedicated hypersonic missile VLS cells, armed with the Navy's new long-range nuclear-tipped cruise missile, the SLCMN, 2 CRAM close-in infrared missile defense systems, and a full modern air defense sensor suite, including spy, Aegis, and all that jazz, augmented by a pair of unspecified, yet-to-be-designed drone defense complexes, all of which to be integrated and networked by a still-to-be-developed AI system. Because of course there had to be a combat-based AI in there somewhere. Anyone want to take bets on who's going to get that contract? I can just see it now. Introducing Grok for War. Or, failing that, our saviour Peter Thiel presents Palantir for Pacific Dominance. Although in reality it's probably going to be Gemini for global conquest. In which case, I wish our overlords here on YouTube at Google great success in their continuing endeavour for world domination. Actually, given they control the search engines and Gmail, they've actually kind of achieved that already. But far be it from me to keep a cyberpunk megacorp down. Now, all of this is actually, and I'm going to shock you here, is actually kind of a good idea. Aside from the fact half the systems don't exist yet. But in theory, this could have a role. A role intended to be filled by the experimental Cruiser X program that was proposed a few years ago. I just have a few questions. The biggest one being, how in God's name are you planning on powering this thing? The design document published by the Navy says it's going to be a gas turbine system. And to their credit, modern gas turbine systems are absolute wizardry in terms of their power output. Except I don't think they've ever been asked to power something on this scale. This thing has a full electronic warfare suite, a full air defense suite with multiple spy radars. In fact, it will be the largest and most complex radar array mounted on a warship since the Long Beach and the Ticonderoga. A combat artificial intelligence network coordinating a cutting-edge combat information center and a full battery of laser systems. Oh, and not to mention, a f***ing railgun. My brothers in Christ, how much fuel are you planning to burn with this thing? Its top speed is supposed to be in excess of 30 knots, while mounting the most advanced weapon systems package, half of which being energy-based weapon systems entirely controlled by the most advanced computer systems ever designed, coordinated by an experimental AI. The fuel bunkers would have to be huge. Either that or the unreps are going to be frequent. Maybe this is why you guys want to invade Venezuela. You're going to need the oil to run this thing. Now, apparently, and this is just the scuttlebutt, it's going to have a full bank of batteries that the steam turbines will charge while it's cruising, thereby negating the need for a constant stream of available power. However, I'd like to point out that this A weighs an insane amount while taking up a shitload of space. B, it means the energy weapons on board will have a limited capacity that will have to be recharged over time, similar to an old diesel-electric sub back in the day. And C, that technically makes this a hybrid. So now the Trump administration is officially supporting hybrid vehicles, as long as you use them to kill people. In any case, from the stats I've seen, from the data we have available, and from the experts I've spoken to who are much better at this than me, it's pretty obvious that this is going to have to be a nuclear design to be remotely practical. But you never know. As I said before, the guys at General Electric and the guys at Westinghouse have achieved miracles with their gas turbines before, so they may very well pull off another one. Yet even if they get the power plant issue squared away, they're still going to have to meet all the operational demands of fielding a surface combatant of this size. They're going to need to have enough ammo for all the weapon systems on board. And while the laser systems will definitely help in that regard, you're still going to need multiple missile and gun magazines both fore and aft. Then you're going to need space for the 850-man crew, as well as provisions to sustain them for an extended cruise, and to keep a low-profile silhouette to maintain low observability, as well as reducing your potential target size in a surface engagement. You can't get around the crew and storage problem by just adding more decks like you do on an aircraft carrier. And if that wasn't enough, you also need an aviation component with hangar space to support V-22 Ospreys for some reason. Again, this is in their document. They want to operate Ospreys off the back of this thing. So that will require a massive helipad, which seems to be really low to the water on these configurations. And that will also require a machine shop and a full aviation maintenance contingent alongside the regular maritime helicopter contingent, which of course means you need to expand the marine contingent aboard to help maintain and operate the Ospreys. And so the list goes on and on and on. And of course, because this ship is apparently being designed as a battleship concept, they have confirmed it will have more armor than your regular fleet vessel, which means more displacement and gross weight, while reducing the available space even more. The list goes on in terms of the various problems they're going to have to overcome, and all of it seems rather ridiculous. But in fairness, there is some merit to the design concept as a whole. A railgun-mounted vessel would open up some excellent tactical possibilities in surface-to-surface combat, as well as a precision shore bombardment weapon. 128 cells of VLS, as well as a full contingent of hypersonic and nuclear cruise missiles, is also nothing to sneeze at, and could prove very useful in a large-scale engagement, particularly around Taiwan against the PLAN. The problem is not all the weapons aboard this ship. The problem is that they're all aboard a ship. While the production run is proposed at 25 ships in total, this is, when you consider all the factors we've listed, a ludicrous number to pursue. As such, the initial procurement order given by the President is 2 or 3, which I assume will mean 1 at sea and 1 in port and 1 in between. A good policy for an experimental capital ship design, to be fair. The United States is facing a critical shortage of available VLS cells in the fleet, as drones, aircraft, and the ever-evolving battle space call for more flexibility. The Navy needs more missile packs armed and ready to fire to meet their potential needs. Meanwhile, their shortcomings in Operation Prosperity Guardian has reinforced the imperative need for air and drone defense. Having surface combatants armed with lasers, SHORAD, and other Aegis integrated air defense system dedicated to countering the new UCAV threat is vital to every Western Navy going forward, to say nothing about having adequate missile defense. A weakness, which the Ukrainians have proven, is a costly mistake to make. And this is something we really have to consider. In the year 2025, we have a first-hand account. We have concrete operational and tactical data that proves an adversary without a blue water navy can decimate an enemy who actually has one through unorthodox tactics and innovative use of new technology. The sinking of the Moskva, the destruction of multiple frigates, and now the sinking of a Kilo-class submarine in port using a submersible drone. Although, to be fair, come on, there's an active war going on in that sea, guys. You should have a submarine net up. That's something we've been doing since World War I. Get it together, guys. And that is really the point. While the Russian Navy is by far the worst of the world's blue water navies, the success of the Ukrainian Navy in denying the Black Sea to its traditional owners is a stark warning to everyone watching the evolution of naval warfare. We live in a true multi-threat domain in an ever-changing, constantly adapting battle space. If you want to survive, fight, and ultimately prevail, you have to be flexible. And the Trump Class Battleship, at least as proposed, isn't. It is the modernization of an archaic concept. All the stuff aboard it is good, and in theory it will be very impressive, but the practical implications of designing it, building it, outfitting it, and then fielding it are so insane, I am skeptical that even the US military has the resources and the patience to do it. The President, SecNav, and SecWar can bluster all they like, but given the track record with the LCS, the Zumwalt, and now the Constellation, my doubts are considerable. And I want to circle back to those programs, because they form the crux of why this entire project is a bad idea. Naval warfare, as we've established, is constantly evolving, and in the era of the battle wagons of old, having large capital ships with amazing capability was the go-to strategy of the time. Yet the largest ship to ever embody that ethos, the Yamato, was sunk by air power, having achieved nothing except the destruction of a few destroyer escorts in a battle they decisively lost. In the modern age of missile warfare, in the age of computer-assisted targeting, battlefield AI, drone swarms and laser defense batteries, one large battleship capable of doing everything and anything is not a priceless asset. It's a giant floating target. When you invest all your resources into one panacea weapon system, it may seem really impressive and it may look really good in the newsreels. Yet all it takes is for the enemy to get one lucky hit, and all that effort goes up in smoke. An eventuality made more and more likely as naval technology continues to develop. So to prevent such a disaster from happening, you will have to dedicate an entire fleet of support assets to ensure the safety of your flagship surface combatant. And do you know what those assets would have to be, boys and girls? That's right. Escorts! The entire program you have been trying to build for the past 20 years. Every simulation, every example of modern combat we have, going back to exercises during the Cold War, Operation Praying Mantis, all the way up to the war in Ukraine, all of it shows that to win a battle against a modern task force, the number one goal is oversaturating the enemy's defense systems. Make it impossible for them to stop every single attack you launch. Whether it be via drones or missiles, you need to create such a complex threat environment that they simply can't stop everything you shoot at them. So the way you counter that is by creating a multi-layered interleaved defense network made up of a large formation of smaller vessels who, with their powers combined, can defend, repel, and then riposte an attack with their own mass missile strike. What we need is not one massive ship with 128 cells of VLS. What we need is 100 smaller stealth frigates with 32 cell VLSs each, working in tandem with a nuclear-powered railgun-armed hypersonic missile cruiser to replace the Ticonderogas. The Trump Battleship would be a great concept as a cruiser. It should be smaller, more focused in its design. It would be great. But battleships are a relic of the past, and they should stay there. To quote a naval analyst colleague working under the handle Strategic Trends on Twitter, "This whole program is a terrible decision in basically any real interpretation. It is doctrinally incompatible with distributed maritime relations and is antithetical to modern fleet design that is actively against large surface combatants of this size. Carriers replaced battleships as the capital ship of the fleets over 70 years ago. What are we doing here? There's a reason why the Kirov is the only other surface combatant that could be compared to the BBGX. And even then it took an extraordinary geostrategic picture and an overwhelming threat environment for the Soviet Navy Design Bureau to produce Kirov. That particular threat environment or operating areas do not exist with the BBGX. There's a good chance it never gets built, and we just placate Trump with it until he's out of office. But realistically, I don't see this seeing the light of day. Also for a litany of reasons. The real damage in this is the time it will cost us, and we're really starting to run out of that. If we zoom out several lenses to a macro scope, this is coming at essentially an inflection point, and we're risking it all purely because of incompetency. We're trading the FAXX for this? The DDGX system as well? What the f*** are we doing? We can't afford any more setbacks at this point. If we're serious about fighting China in the Pacific, make a vision and stick with it. And his words allow me to segue into my final but very angry culminating point, and the reason I began this video with the tale of Billy Mitchell. This debate has already been solved. Despite the various advances in technology, the advent of the drone and the hypersonic missile has decisively reaffirmed naval aviation as the pinnacle of the fleet's capability. In the modern era of naval combat operations, the long-range missile is the king of the battle space. Everything in naval combat revolves around this capability, whether it be a shipwreck, a harpoon, or a tasser. Firing a computerized rocket with a lot of bang at the front is the name of the game. However, as one can probably guess, a missile needs a launch platform. What's more, they need an entire suite of supplementary systems, sensors, and logistics to function. And perhaps most difficult of all, they are subject to the most brutal legal system imaginable. That being, the laws of physics. The atmosphere at sea level is dense. Missiles fired from a warship have to pass through that dense layer of air, and when passing through it, they have to cope with wind resistance, drag, and gravity, all of which reduce the missile's range and its probability of kill. But what if, now hear me out, this is crazy, what if you could launch a missile from really high up in the atmosphere where the air is thin? And what if you could carry that missile really far? In fact, you could carry that missile so far that you could get really close to the enemy before even firing the rocket motor, giving you a strike range quadruple that of a conventionally launched missile. And if you launch it from that high, what if gravity, instead of being a hindrance to the weapon system's probability of kill, instead increased its terminal velocity and by extension its lethality? Well, good news, dear viewers. We have something for that. It's called an aircraft. And do you know what you need to operate those at sea? That's right, an aircraft carrier. Refining, improving, and commissioning the Ford class should be the highest priority for the Navy, followed closely by a mass-produced, versatile, VLS-equipped frigate to supplement the Arleigh Burkes. But perhaps most vitally of all, in terms of the upcoming threat posed by China, the Navy desperately, critically, as in national emergency critically, needs the F/A-XX program. The F-47 is currently already in the back half of its development cycle. The Chinese are already fielding prototypes of a long-range 6th generation strike aircraft, as well as a potential 6th generation fighter. They already have 300 J-20s in service, and a full fleet of navalized F-35 clones as well. And the latest crop of Chinese air-to-air missiles are so butt-clenchingly terrifying that they retrofitted an Aegis SM-6 missile into the AIM-174 just to give the Navy something to counter it while they wait for Raytheon to get their shit together on the AIM-260 AMRAAM replacement. If Naval Aviation doesn't get a 6th generation fighter and a fully revamped drone capability and new missiles, if the US Navy doesn't get a full fleet of VLS-capable support frigates to act as motherships, mission coordinators, and air defense for those drones, the US Navy is going to sleepwalk into a disaster not seen since the dark days of January 1942. Wrong-footed and outgunned once again in the Pacific Ocean. Yet the President of the United States wants a battleship, and he hates the email's electromagnetic catapults on the Ford. So here they are, cancelling the Constellation, replacing it with a Coast Guard cutter, proposing to build battleships, cutting the F/A-XX program budget by 85%, and if the Golden Fleet, as they're calling it, is to see fruition, they actually plan on replacing the later ships in the Ford class with a new type of smaller fleet carrier that, yes, will be returning to steam catapults. You will get another block of F-18s, and you will like it. And while I love the F-18 Block 3 from the bottom of my heart, they need to be replaced with a 6th gen fighter. This entire project, this entire proposed Golden Fleet of theirs, flies in the face of all modern thinking, all military logic, and against all the evidence we've seen in the ongoing development of modern navies. Large numbers of medium-sized, stealthy, operationally flexible VLS-equipped frigates supported by carriers and nuclear submarines is the way to go. It has been seen to be and proven to be the way to go by the US Navy itself. So why is the Trump administration proposing a battleship? It's simple. Soviet appropriation policy. In fact, the Secretary of the Navy revealed the true purpose of the ship when he said, and I quote, "The USS Defiant battleship will inspire awe and reverence for the American flag whenever it pulls into a foreign port. It will be a source of pride for every American." And just as it was in the Soviet Union, one surefire way to get a project funded is by overpromising on its capabilities and then naming it after the glorious leader. If you want to find out how that went, watch my video, The Horrible History of Russian Fighter Planes. And watch out for the segment on Sylvansky. It never goes well. Yet it is a pattern that we have seen throughout the history of the Soviet Union, with ever larger and more ridiculous weapon systems being proposed, built, and then utterly failing. Yet now, the game is repeating itself in the United States. Overpromise on capability, make it big and impressive so everyone marvels at its power, dedicate its glory to the great leader, and yet if you scratch beneath the surface, you will find an archaic yet overpriced system, unfit for purpose and completely incapable of meeting the very real challenges of the coming conflict in the Pacific. We can only pray that saner minds will prevail eventually. Though, then again, if nothing else, this may motivate the US Navy to build some new shipyards, finally, after all these years. Like, seriously, guys. China has double the shipyards that you do, and you have 2 coastlines. Work it out, fellas. You've got the money. I know you do. Get moving. If nothing else, it will help you build the frigates you need when all of this eventually gets cancelled. Oh, and if we are going to call it the Golden Fleet, could you at least bring back the old Great White Fleet livery? Yeah. In fact, you know what? On all the new ships, when they come back in port, mount a giant Imperial Eagle on the front. Would be amazing. Actually, would pay to see that. Bright white hulls, golden superstructures. Let's make it happen, fellas. Anyway, that's my video on the monstrosity that is the Trump Class Battleship. We'll be back with Soviet aviation and our regular programming in the next couple of days. I've been Animarchy. See ya.